In November of 1987, Dragon Magazine issue 127 was released, and it introduced the world to the terrifying tale of Tucker's Kobolds. So if you don't know anything about me, my name is Fusey, and my favourite D&D monster is the Kobold. So this story is fucking awesome to me, and if you like the Kobolds, you'll enjoy it too. If you've never heard the story before, stick around, we're going to talk about it. So for the uninitiated, what is a kobold? Well, a kobold is a mischievous sprite or gnome from the Germanic folklore, often a household spirit that helps with chores and plays pranks. It evolved into modern fantasy through Dungeons & Dragons into small reptilian humanoids with draconic tails, known for trapping and mining, and are fiercely loyal to their tribe. Now I've ripped that straight from Google, but if you play Dungeons & Dragons, you'll know kobolds as these little guys. Some of them are terrifying little reptilian monsters, and some of them are absolutely adorable. Look at him! So we're going to specifically talk about the Dungeons & Dragons version of kobolds. So here are the stats for a kobold. They are a CR 1 of 8, which means it's a challenge rating 1/8, so it's equivalent to about 1/8 of a challenge for a single level 1 character, and for a standard 4-player party, you'd need about 8 of them to actually pose a challenge. So this is where Tucker's Kobolds come in. Now, to fully understand this story, you have to understand that this was back in the 1980s, meaning this is First Edition D&D, not 5th Edition, not 5.5 Edition, the stuff that we're used to, First Edition. And for anyone who's not familiar with First Edition D&D, I know a lot of my players didn't even know it existed. They thought 5e was just the default Dungeons & Dragons. It was not a forgiving place. So just to demonstrate this, the second you hit 0 HP, you are dead. There is no death saves. And for saving throws and such, you had a single saving throw, fail of which often meant instant character death. So every corner you turned, death. But even with these rules, kobolds are still extremely weak. So why is the tale of Tucker's Kobolds so terrifying? Well, let's actually talk about it now. The stone walls of the upper levels were narrow. They were rough-hewn with the smell of damp earth and old grease. To the veterans of the Golden Company, this was supposed to be a stroll through a nuisance. They wore an enchanted plate that could deflect a giant's club. They carried staves that could crack the sky. To them, a kobold was nothing more than a pest to be stepped upon. The first sign of the shift was a sound. Not a war cry, but a frantic, rhythmic clinking of metal on stone behind the walls. It followed them, echoing through hundreds of tiny vents, with cracks too small for a human hand to enter. Then the air grew heavy. From the murder holes bored into the ceiling, a thick, viscous oil began to rain. It wasn't a trap meant to kill, but to coat. Every inch of the heroes' fine silk capes and polished steel became a thick, heavy liability. When the first clay pot shattered at their feet, releasing a swarm of agitated, starving centipedes, the party realized they weren't in a dungeon. They were inside of a machine. There was no longer any honor in that hallway. When the wizard tried to speak a word of power, a jagged wooden pole darted from the slit in the wall, slamming into his throat before the syllable could even escape. When the fighter charged the darkness, the floor beneath him didn't drop into a pit. It tilted, sliding him into a narrow chute that deposited him 40 feet back the way he came, separated from his allies by a heavy iron portcullis that dropped with the finality of a guillotine. In the flickering torchlight, they never saw a full body, only glimpses. A scaly snout, a glinting yellow eye, a clawed hand pulling a lever. The kobolds didn't stand and fight. They scurried through a hive of secret passages, appearing only long enough to drop a beehive or tip a vat of boiling lead or scatter jagged caltrops into the darkness, and by the time the sun god's paladin had reached the end of the corridor, his breath was a ragged gasp. He wasn't bleeding from a sword wound. He was covered in stings, burns, and the humiliating stench of offal. He looked back at the low-level floor of the dungeon and saw only a dark, yapping throat that had swallowed his pride and his supplies. The monsters below were powerful, yes, but the monsters here? The monsters here were smart.